That's a good question. And the answers to it are very strange. If we look back to the time before the Gospels, what we find is that early Christians had a very strange view of Jesus. And so, if you look at something like the writings of Paul, which we have 7 different letters from Paul addressed to different Christian churches, we also have a forged letter supposedly written by James, who will later be described as being Jesus' brother. But it's clear that the author of this letter, while trying to borrow on the popularity of James and the authority of James, clearly has no idea that this character is supposed to be Jesus' brother. So that obviously that idea didn't exist yet. That doesn't come around until the Gospels, which were written later, and also writings such as the Book of Revelation or the letter to the Hebrews, which was forged in Paul's name but wasn't written by Paul. If you read these letters, which are our earliest surviving Christian writings, Jesus is very different from the Jesus you will later find in the gospel stories, which were written decades later. And in these early letters, the character of Jesus is sort of like a pre-existent figure. He's a divine figure. Nowhere does it say he was ever on earth. When they place him anywhere, he's placed up in the sky or up in heaven, but there's no reference to him being on earth at all. There's no reference to him interacting with anyone in human history. Like he doesn't interact with Pontius Pilate or King Herod or anything like that. He doesn't actually personally interact with people. He appears in visions, or people see visions of his crucifixion and his resurrection. But no one says that they saw these things in person. They all had visions of them. In fact, there's one scene in the letters of Paul where he references that an entire congregation all witnessed the crucifixion of Jesus. Everyone had like a sort of mass delusion or a mass vision where everyone witnessed this thing. And so it's this very strange sort of Christianity that we have in the early days where Christ appears in visions and not really to talk to people. He doesn't come in and say things to you. People receive visions of things that happened to Jesus. And it's only his being ambushed by demons, his mock trial, his crucifixion, his death, and his resurrection. And of course his ascension into heaven to the highest throne. Those things are all seen in visions. People witnessed these events when they had hallucinations. But there's no reference to anyone seeing these things happen on earth. So that's very strange. And the fact that Jesus was crucified by evil angels and not by humans, not by Romans. He wasn't put on trial by Jews. All this happened up in the heavens, up in the sky, by angels, by demons who did this, not people. And so that's a very strange thing that early Christians believed. The idea that he was on earth was still decades to come. Another thing is that Jesus was this pre-existent figure. He was some sort of deity that existed before the creation of the world. So this is before the six-day creation. From what we can kind of reverse engineer, he was created on the first day of creation, or before the first day. And so he would have been created, and then power was sort of funneled through Jesus, through this Son of Man figure. And this sort of refined that power, and through Jesus, this power could be focused to then create the rest of the universe, the sun, the moon, the sky, the earth, the water, the animals, people, everything else. And so he wasn't actually a creator. He was a tool of creation. El Elyon created this figure, this deity, and then focused his power through this deity to then create the rest of the universe. And that's when your days of creation kick in, was during this point. And so he's a pre-existent being. He predates the universe, not someone who was born in like 1 AD and then became more holy as he progressed. They seem to have believed that he was a pre-existent figure. He'd always been there, before the earth, and was always divine. There's this idea that he put on a body made of human flesh, and this was a body that was manufactured using sperm that was preserved from King David. Now, this may seem extremely odd, but this was actually a fairly popular belief, not just for Jesus, but for other mythical figures as well. We have a story very similar to this, in fact, almost identical to this, that the prophet Zarathustra, this is the mythical founding prophet of the religion Zoroastrianism, a Persian religion that had a heavy influence on Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But we have this myth that Zarathustra was swimming in a lake and left behind some DNA, and this DNA was then preserved in this magical lake that may or may not have been in heaven, so that it could later be used to create this messianic figure called the Saoshyant. And we have a very similar story in which David, some of his DNA gets extracted and is then preserved in, I guess, almost like a cosmic sperm bank, for lack of a better term. And it is preserved by these female angels. I can't remember the name of her, but we actually have the name of a female angel in Jewish mythology that operates a cosmic sperm bank and serves this role. She preserves all of this DNA from different humans to be used for different purposes. And one of the purposes is to make bodies for spirits to inhabit. And we see a reference to this in the first chapter of Paul's letter to the Romans. It says that Jesus, that the Christ, inhabits a body manufactured by El using the sperm of David. And some people try to say, oh, well, this means that, he's a descendant of David and, the whole line of Joseph and everything else. But it doesn't say that he was born of a virgin whose husband was from the line of David or anything like that. That's nowhere in there. It says he was manufactured. And this verb used actually means that he was created. He was made. It's the same verb used when they talk about when Yahweh created Adam out of clay. It doesn't say he was born of clay. It says he was manufactured of the sperm of David. And so that's another strange belief that we have of early Christianity concerning Jesus, that this spirit that existed before time inhabited a body made of human flesh that was grown from the sperm of David that had been preserved up in heaven. And this was a body manufactured by God specifically for this purpose. And that's a very strange belief that is reflected nowhere in the later Gospels. It's only in this earlier Christianity that we see anything like that. We also have an idea that some early Christians held that Jesus was not connected at all with Yahweh, and this we see from the Gnostics. Jesus was connected to a different deity who was unknown by humans before this time, and was not connected to the Hebrew God. They thought the Hebrew God was barbaric and more of like a Satan figure, that he was something to be feared, and that the sacrifice of Jesus was a payment to the Old Testament God to buy humanity from this God so that we can now live under the grace of this more kind and benevolent deity that really didn't have a name. And so that's another weird little strange belief that some early Christians had. But the idea that he was born of a virgin named Mary, that he lived on earth, that he grew up in first century Palestine, that he was killed by Romans, that he was betrayed by Jews, those ideas kind of don't exist yet. That doesn't happen until sometime after the Jewish War. So after 70 AD, those ideas begin to pop up. But before then, we don't have any reference to them at all. If you want to see a very clear view of what some Christians believed, there's a text called The Ascension of Isaiah. And it has this scene where this Christ, Jesus, who lives up in heaven, begins to descend through the 7 different layers of heaven. And as he does so, in each layer, he strips off a part of himself to become less divine and more human. And it's said that he's basically casting off his robes of immortality and putting on garments of flesh. And this was ascension and descension terminology used to describe the transition between a fleshly form and a heavenly form, or vice versa. And this actually comes from like a 5,000-year-old myth about the goddess Inanna, who does this exact same thing. And as the goddess descends through the different layers of heaven, she strips off parts of herself to become less divine and more mortal. And we have this scene where Jesus is doing the same thing. He starts off as a god, as a divine figure, as an archangel. And as he descends, he becomes less and less divine and more mortal, to the point that the beings of heaven don't even recognize him. And that's actually the whole point. He's supposed to be in disguise. They're not supposed to know who he is. His identity is kept secret. It specifically says that. And this hidden figure drops down to the lowest heaven, and then he descends below that, down to the realm of the firmament, which is considered to be our atmosphere. This is where the sun and the moon would be. And when he gets down to this level, because he now just looks like a human being, he's now wearing this body made from the sperm of David. He looks like a man. But he's in the wrong place. He's up in the firmament, not down on earth. And so the sky demons that inhabit this realm up in the atmosphere, they attack him because they don't know who he is, and they crucify him. And this is done because if he were to sacrifice himself, then his blood could be used to purify the corrupt creation of the earth. But the demons, they wouldn't attack him if they knew who he was, because they don't want the world to be purified through his divine blood. And that's why he puts on this earthly body and becomes less divine, becomes, mortal, is to basically trick them into killing him, because then he can sacrifice himself, his blood can be poured out, it can purify the world, and then it can sort of free the creation and humanity from this demonic corruption. And that's spelled out quite plainly in this apocryphal text called the Ascension of Isaiah. And so those are just some of the strange things that early Christians believed, and those beliefs, most of them, would eventually become lost.